Yesterday what topic she wanted to teach on this morning. And we had just flew back last night from being at a memorial service for her Uncle Jim, who was this really wonderful, big-hearted guy that was head of the Modern Art Dealers Association of New York, which can be a very fraught line of work. What's real? Who did it? Is this a copy? Is it, and he was a gentleman, honest and trustworthy and very simple and straightforward in his dealings. People really loved him because of his integrity and his good, warm heart. He was 90 years old, and it was his time. But one of the things that was interesting at the memorial, as the stories were told, and Trudy, of course, knew this, is that Jim and her father, Howard, and then the third brother, Lou, they had a pretty rough childhood. Their father died when they were very young. Their uncles and so forth were not nice, were really difficult. So they lost their father. They had other kinds of adverse things. And yet somehow they came out really good. Jim was good. Trudy's dad was a physician who went to the World Health Organization and helped create the protocol for global health in Africa and Latin America. Initially, WHO was mostly focused on the Europe and North America. And he said, wait a second, what about the rest of the world? Sort of did that for years. So they turned out beautifully. And the question is, how does that happen? How do you have difficulties, adverse childhood experiences, as we might say? And what is it that allows some people to transform them? So that was the kind of question in Trudy's mind. And I started to reflect on the things that I'd learned about this. And in a certain way, this is all just a reflection together. And one of the things that really changed my life, because I also had a very painful family circumstance, which I might talk about in a few minutes, was when I encountered other people who had not only gone through difficult things, but also carried some wisdom, we'll call it dharma wisdom or teachings, that showed a way that there was to follow that could transform the suffering. And of course we hear about, the great exemplars like Nelson Mandela, and I got a chance to be with this man, Mahagosananda, who was the Gandhi of Cambodia, nominated for the Nobel Prize many times, who after all his extended family was killed, led for 15 years these peace walks across Cambodia through the killing fields and so forth, taking people back to their villages, chanting, hatred never ceases by hatred, but by love alone is healed. This is the ancient and eternal law. And he had such a big heart. He said, it will not help to fuel the hatred. We have to turn this around. So meeting people like that. A friend of mine, Sujata Buliga, just got the MacArthur kind of Genius Grant Prize. Her story was written up in New York Times Magazine. She was born into an immigrant Indian American family and terribly abused, sexually abused in different ways. Real smart, and studied to kind of get out of her trouble, went to Harvard, and then decided, I'm going to go to Harvard Law School, and I'm going to become a prosecutor, and I'm going to get those people who ruin children's lives, right? But she started to get very sick as well inside because the anger was eating her up. She went back to India, traveled before law school, and she was in Dharamsala and left a note in the Dalai Lama's mailbox, which you can do there, and said, is there any way I can get some advice? I'm about to go to law school, become a prosecutor, but my rage and anger is just eating me up. What do I do with this? I've had so much suffering. And sure enough, a little note came and said, His Holiness will see you next Thursday morning at 10. Okay. So she went in to see him, told her whole story, And in the end, he said, there are two things you must do. First, you must learn to meditate, compassion practice for everyone. She said, oh, I think I can do that. He said, second, you must work with the perpetrators. She said, oh, no way. Anyway, as things unfolded, she came back, she began to meditate, and as she did her compassion practice over and over with the inspiration of the Dalai Lama, she began to see it all the suffering with compassion. And it allowed her to begin to do a work that's called restorative justice, that many of you may know about, in which you very gently and gradually bring together the perpetrators and the people who've been victimized. And often it happens in prison too, like my friend Jacques Verdun, who runs the Inside Prison Project, has done this work. It takes a lot of preparation, but sometimes the people in prison want to be able to speak to those that they've harmed, or their family, even if they've killed somebody. And the family wants to meet that person and understand, not always. And with a lot of care and preparation, eventually they can come back together. And as I've seen doing the prison work, somebody will say, I did some horrible, crazy things when I was 19 and effed up on drugs. And now it's 25 years later, I'm not that person. I want to apologize. And the people who do the restorative justice say that when it works, when people are prepared and they come back together, you can be sitting in some room in the prison. It's about the most holy thing they've ever seen, because there's so much both pain and forgiveness and realness and honesty and understanding, that it becomes a kind of sacred act when it happens. So I've had the privilege, and you probably have had too, of meeting people who've taken their difficulties. Trudy talks about many of the difficulties she's been with, and show that that's not the end of the story. And it reminds us that suffering is the first of the Buddhist truths, and its causes, but the end of the story is actually liberation of the heart, is the possibility of freedom. The second thing that's been really important is the intention to practice. As the Dalai Lama asked of Sujata, it's one thing to encounter this, but it's another thing to be inspired and to set in yourself some way the intention to do something differently with it. I was just this last week at Stanford doing a big thing for the campus together with Tim Ryan, congressman from Ohio, who last week dropped out of the presidential race. He was sort of one of the lower tier ones, and he realized it wasn't happening in that way. But he'd written a book called Mindfulness, about how to include social and emotional learning and mindfulness in school systems, in healthcare, in business, and so forth. And all the neuroscience research that says that children's lives can be changed when they learn how to regulate themselves and become attentive. And here's what's happened in his district, in a part of Ohio where a lot of the industry had closed and there was a lot of depression. How helpful it had been. He gave it to every member of Congress. So we're on stage. I said, Tim, did any of them read it? He said, not very many. I said, how many? He said, we don't know, maybe a couple, But what we talked about was the fact that it's possible, and that there are trainings and practices. It's not just a good idea to have a wise society where people treat each other respectfully and listen to one another across differences and solve conflict in creative ways and treat the environment well. Those are all nice ideals. But how do we do it And the beautiful thing is that you can train yourself, your own heart and mind, and children can be trained to do this because it's innate in them. There's a basic goodness in children that can be touched. I think of this story. Sarah, a single mom with 2 kids, found out that her 8-year-old daughter Alicia had leukemia. Sarah was terrified, anxious, grieving the loss of her child's health, scared that she would lose her. For the first year, Alicia went through long rounds of chemotherapy, hospital stays, and doctors. A fearful sadness filled the house, and anxiety colored Sarah's days. Then one day, in the afternoon when they were out for a walk, Alicia said, "Mama, I don't know how long I'm going to live, but I want them to be happy days." Her words like a splash of cold water on her mother's face. Sarah realized she had to step out of the fearful melodrama and meet her daughter's freedom of mind with her own, to return to a trusting spirit. She grabbed her daughter and did a little waltz, holding her tight, and her fear began to dissipate. And in time, Alicia healed. She's now 22, just graduated from college. But this is what's possible for us. And the thing that we learn as we practice is how to do it, how to be present for the difficulties. And the loving awareness itself starts to allow them to be released and transformed. Now, it's also true when the trauma is deep that it helps to have therapy. It helps to have good trauma work. All those things where someone basically meditates with us and says, all right, here's how you can find your inner resources. Here's how you can release and tell the stories that you need to without being completely drowned in them. And little by little, there's a deep kind of healing that can happen. But as Sarah, the story of Sarah and Alicia tells, it's also possible to shift from being the victim as your identity to something else. As Guillaume Apollinaire has said, now and then it's best to pause in your pursuit of happiness and just be happy. You know, that this is possible for us, that we can turn and direct our attention not as a kind of spiritual bypass. You're not going to escape suffering that way, because there is suffering as part of life. But to realize in the midst of it that there are choices that the heart can make. Now, what else is helpful in this? To me, it's been enormously helpful to have community and good friends. In fact, the Buddha said at one point that not just half, but the whole of the holy life in some way is good friendship and companionship with that which is awakened, compassionate, noble, wise, all of those things. And for me, my father was paranoid, violent. He was a brilliant guy who, taught in medical schools and he was a biophysicist, did space medicine and, worked on some of the earliest artificial hearts and lungs, did all kind of interesting things. But he was violent and abusive and kind of mentally ill. And he would, rage at us children, and he would beat my mother, throw her down the stairs. She had to wear long sleeves in the summer to cover up the black and blue marks of being beaten. So that was, it was tough. I had 3 brothers, so there were 4 of us. And I don't know how I would have survived without that. But we became a kind of band, a camaraderie for one another, that could help ourselves outside of that fear and outside of that suffering. And I think about it, when I came back from my own training and learning meditation in the monasteries of Thailand and Burma and India and so forth, I also found kindred spirits. I found friends, Joseph Goldstein, Sharon Salzberg, who've now become famous meditation teachers. But we were all kids. As Sharon said, we started these big meditation centers without any adult supervision, you know. Sharon was 21 when she started to teach. A very, very wise 21 who had suffered enormously and transformed it in her years in India. And Joseph and I. But we all know this, you know. They say that if Jesus were to come back, it's probably the first place he would go would be to the AA meeting in the church basement, because those are his people, you know. A place where two or more are gathered to tell the truth, to support one another, to become a kind of community. And I've seen it in running retreats for vets with the Mosaic Multicultural Foundations, does amazing stuff. Michael Mead, Luis Rodriguez, others who've been part, Malidoma Somé, and so forth. Because vets are not often safe enough to talk about what happened. And if we get a room of vets or even combat vets together and make the right kind of place that's safe enough, light the candles and say this is the sacred space that can hold all of our humanity, you know, these vets, men and women, will say their stories I can't tell my family. They're just too ghastly and painful. I've never told. And they'll say, I can't tell you what I saw, but here's some of it. And then something much more difficult. I can't tell you what I had to do. And that's really the weight on the soul. The Irish call it a geisha, weight on the soul that has to somehow be released. And to make a place where not only the stories can be told as they were in these retreats where we would meditate together and speak and the truth and do other rituals and various things, but in the end invite their families and communities to come in, and they would read a part of a poem or story that tells some piece of it. And then there was a welcoming ritual to say, yes, we hear your story, we hear your suffering, and we welcome all of you back into the community. It was really moving. So your friends, your community, are also part of what allow you to transform yourself. And all of this invites a shift of identity. This is from Carl Fried Durkheim, who was a Zen teacher. He says, the person who, being really on the way, falls upon hard times in the world, will not, as a consequence, turn toward those who offer them refuge and comfort and encourage their old self to survive. Rather, they will seek out someone who will faithfully and inexorably help them to risk themselves so that they may endure the difficulty and pass courageously through it. Only to the extent that a person exposes themselves over and over again to annihilation can that which is indestructible be found within them. In this daring lies dignity and the true spirit of awakening. And so there comes a kind of a shift of identity. Who are we? You know, and in this family gathering in New York, there was part of the family, one of my, dear cousins, both of whose parents were Holocaust survivors. As children, they were in the concentration camps. And there's this whole lineage. How do you take that history and change it to something else? And when Trudy went to Africa with IACT, with this little and very, very moving anti-genocide project that works with the Darfur refugees. Many of you have heard her tell her stories, those of you who know her. She went as an expert in early childhood education, which is one of many things, and as a therapist as well as a teacher, all these things, to train the young women, older women who were the teachers in these camps, the teachers of children. And they trained in ritual, and they trained in education and how you help children and all the things you do with trauma, the best that she could. And at the end, she asked them, of all the kinds of trainings that we offered to you, in education and attention and this and that, what was your favorite? And the women said, mindfulness. And she said, why is that? And they said, because the past is too painful. I mean, all these people fled villages where many people were killed, much of their family destroyed, all of that, terror. And the future, remember, they've been in these refugee camps for 10, 12, 13, 14 years. The future we don't know. What we have is this present moment. And this gives us a relief to actually be alive where we are in this very deep way. And what you start to hear is a kind of shift of identity from taking yourself to be a certain way to realize that that's not who you are. That who you are is larger and freer and more larger and freer and not limited by your past. Which is a kind of wild thing to say, But here was Ram Dass. I love telling this story. And Trudy and I are about to go teach with Ram Dass at the end of the month. Come back from India in his early days, having written Be Here Now. He's a big celebrity. And he came back in the guise of a guru. He was wearing white and had his beads and his beard and, teaching people to chant and all of this stuff. So there he is on stage, Hindu guru, and there's a woman in the front row, raises her hand, Ram Dass, aren't you Jewish? Come on, get on with this Hindu stuff. Ram Dass says, yes. She says, so what about it? He says, all right. He said, I am Jewish. I was born Jewish. I was bar mitzvahed, as I was. He said, and there are things that I just love in the Jewish spiritual tradition. I love the sense of family and community. I love the Hasidic masters. They're like Zen masters when you read all those stories. I love the Kabbalah and all these different, levels of consciousness that you can open to. He paused for a minute and he says, but remember, I'm only Jewish on my parents' side. He was very witty and also very deep, because who you are is not limited to your history. Who you are is that spirit that was born into this body, this incarnation, and that will also leave it, by the way, just in case you hadn't, reflected on that. You're not your body. I mean, you get to use it and care for it, but you're simply not kale and Big Macs. It's just not who you are, And you're not your emotions, I hope. You get to enjoy them or not. And you're not your thoughts. God, spare you, right? Who are you? You are the consciousness. You are the loving awareness, the consciousness that inhabits this body, this spirit. And that is fundamentally free. So then the question I have for you now, we'll take a little time as we do in these classes to pass the mic. And I have a question for you. What is it that has helped bring the sense of inner liberation to you in your difficulties? Or what else in the meditation or where you are in any way that you want to share? We have about 20 minutes or so until the class ends. And it's always great to hear from the community. And just please say your first name.
Hi, I'm Ryan, and I have a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old, and they've learned social emotional development at their preschool, and it taught me what I didn't learn from my parents, and then helped me be a better son to my parents through my children, which I'm grateful for.
Beautiful, Ryan. And it's true, we, those of us who have kids actually get to redo our childhood as our children grow. And what you describe is so beautiful, what your children have taught you. Yeah, thank you.
I'll go.
Hi.
Shall I go? Okay. Hi, Jake. Hi, Jack. Thanks for the talk. Good to see you. I was reflecting on what Ryan was saying. On my wife and I are pregnant and giving birth any moment now. Any day now. And kind of entering into this space, and it's just been interesting. I also am part of a Diamond Heart group in the Bay Area, and was just up there this past yesterday, and the topic of childhood and how that shapes us and has been coming up a lot. And so I'm feeling that aliveness and appreciating that, and then the ways in which that shapes us but doesn't determine us is just feeling like a sweet place to be in. And so I'm appreciating the talk. Yeah,
there was a moment, it's not exactly around parenting, although I'm completely thrilled about you having this baby come in. It's stunning. Here's another human being coming into the world, just waiting for you. Daddy. Anyway, when I was first learning clinical work as a psychologist, I had, in my first clinical class, this old, kind of grizzled old psychologist who was the head of a big state mental hospital in Massachusetts. And at one point, after he was starting to tell us some clinical protocols, he said, you know, you have a lot of responsibility as a clinician. He said, people's lives are in your hands. They're going to listen to you because you're the expert. You have to really tune in and get there and be careful about what you say. And, you know, take this seriously. This is this role of the healer and so forth in this culture. Kind of scared us a little bit, like, whoa, big responsibility. And then he laughed and he said, but don't take it too seriously, because in the end, they do just what they want anyway, right? And there's something about that in parenting, that in some way it's an amazing role and you want to do it really beautifully. And in another way, it's not in your hands, baby. This person's going to come in and they are who they are, and your job is to love them and protect them and let them be who they are. So both are true. But anyway, congratulations. So cool. Please.
Hi. So I recently heard that, and this is something that I'm sure many of you already know, but it's just a good reminder, and it helps me to just come back to the present moment, is that the quality of your breath is equivalent to the quality of your life. Mm-hmm. And so if you ever notice that you're holding your breath, it's like, oh, okay. Yeah. So that helps me.
Beautiful. Thank you.
That's okay. I'll go next. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for the talk. Great to see you. We're expecting to end of January.
Oh, wow. Something about dharma practice that just makes you fertile here. Okay.
Yeah, the seeds of dharma. I suppose what helps me in those situations is maybe the sense of the work never being done. It's just something handed to you, and then it's on you how you work with it, and to keep yourself open. Well, after whatever the healing period and all that, and then you have to open yourself up.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. And again, congratulations. It's wonderful.
I'm Maxine, and I'm not pregnant.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't feel a little miracle. I just so love that question. For me, I was so tired of being the victim that I felt like I was carrying this ball and chain with me everywhere I went. And it wasn't until I was with a loving community, as you talk about, where I got to really express that dark side of my soul and stuff that would, the shame and the embarrassment, and when you were giving the guided meditation, to just give it a name. But it's usually how it used to be with me was, no, go away, I want it. And to sit there with it and to share it with another human being. The pain was so great, and the freedom afterwards was even greater. And so I know now when I want to just whoosh it away, to just sit with it. And it is painful, and yet the freedom on the other end, I've got enough of it to know now that's available to me. And I'm ever grateful for that, for the knowledge of that.
Thank you.
Michelle. I just wanted to share something that I thought was neat that happened during the meditation, and also express my gratitude for having the opportunity. I lost my parents 35 years ago, so I was just leaving childhood and entering adulthood when that happened. And while they were lovely, well-intentioned people and they never did anything horrible, they were not always capable of sort of being there emotionally, and I was a very needy, emotional child, apparently.
I'm dubious about that.
Right, yeah, I know, that's what I'm saying. Of course, you've all heard that message, right? You're too much. Anyway, my point was that for, I've done a lot of work and trauma work and blah, 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 and I just had something happen in this meditation that was really neat, where I was sort of like, I've always been having that longing for like what they couldn't provide, and then losing them, and just, being bereaved, that grief for 35 years, which I just at this point don't think will ever go away. But I had this moment where I was like, feeling kind of like who could help them, and then realizing I could help them. I could help myself, like who could be there for both me and for them. And I just sort of had this image of kind of like being expanded enough to kind of like hold all three of us. And that just gave me such a great, lovely sense of relief. So thank you.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you so much.
Hi, Jack. Oh. Hello?
No.
It's okay, I don't like microphones anyways. I'll just speak loudly.
Wait just a second.
Recording. Testing.
Hello?
Yeah.
All right, we're here. My name is Max. Thank you, Jack. I appreciated the talk. Recently, I went through a teacher training at the Den to become a mindfulness instructor. And it's been a great pleasure to kind of be sitting up there, and I'm not making any bold claims. I'm teaching a very simple mindfulness class. But it's been incredibly teaching to me to learn from the students and have these kind of discussions. And I think it's definitely transformed my own experience with the practice and with the teachings themselves. And something I've actually started to recognize that I'm struggling with is starting to doubt myself and my right to kind of be up there as the teacher and instructing these people in the classes. And I was kind of curious what your input is as a teacher. How did you kind of deal with that, recognizing that we are all human and we have our own things that we struggle with and difficult emotions that overcome us? How do you still find the belief in yourself that you still can help teach and spread the teachings, even if you don't have it all perfectly figured out yourself?
You don't? So I have a question for you, a couple actually, so keep the mic. There's a practical and then the inner one, which you're really asking about. In your background, what background of retreat practice have you done, if any? Have you ever done any residential retreats overnight?
So I've been on a single retreat. It was a requirement of the teacher training. And I'm actually planning on going on a week silent retreat in January.
And a single retreat means, again, a week or something?
Yeah.
That they put on?
Yes.
Okay, great. So the reason I'm asking that is that it's actually your own practice experience. Now that you're starting to teach, in some way there's a beautiful thing that happens where you realize, well, I can do this, but I actually want to do it better. I need to come from a deeper place still. And mostly that comes through your own experience and practice. So to the extent that you can do some more retreats, that will kind of ground you and give you, you'll be sitting through the difficulties and the joys and so forth. It'll give you an experience that you can really communicate to others. That being said, the doubting mind which comes that says, do I have it, is there enough, and so forth, it has two functions. One is there's some wisdom in it, keeps you humble, because the truth is you don't have it together. Nobody has it completely together. That's not our human nature, right? Ryokan, the great, probably most beloved poet in Japan, wrote in one poem, last year, a foolish monk, this year, no change. So, I mean, that's part of our, it's actually the vulnerability of being real with yourself and others. But the second part, and you can sort of see the doubting mind and notice, oh, this is doubt, and it's kind of natural, because you're trying to carry something that has, that really touches the heart of another person. And you also see where you're not quite at that place in yourself. You can feel the distance between those two. And that actually can feel a little bit disconcerting or even painful. These words, boy, they sound good. I wish there was somebody doing it, right? But it keeps you honest. So it's not a bad thing, actually. It makes you, in some way, want to search for what's deep in yourself and to deepen your own practice in such a way that you can do that. So good luck with it.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Jack. My name's Catherine. Thank you. So I just wanted to share something that has been really helpful for me in the moments where I felt adrift, maybe in my own practice of sitting, not maybe up to the task that was in front of me of being with whatever was really painful. And in some traditions, you recite every morning, now I've been born as a child of the Buddha. And that was so helpful for me in those moments of feeling the community that had come before me, all the people that had walked this path and that had made a path so that I could walk it. And their many, many trials and tribulations in their practice. I felt really supported by that, so I just wanted to offer that.
Beautiful. And the Buddhist texts begin, some of them, with this phrase, O nobly born, O you who are the sons and daughters of the awakened ones, remember your true nature, remember who you really are, which is really, what you're saying in that gorgeous way. Now I'm born, say it again.
Now I've been born as the child of the Buddha.
Take that in, everybody. It's beautiful. So I have a little last story to tell and then a way to finish up for this morning. We finish at 9:30, is that correct, Mark? 10:30, excuse me. 9:30, I guess that would be tomorrow or tonight, whatever. Last year, sometime, it was a year and a half ago, when Jerry Brown was still the governor, he had a big climate conference in San Francisco, California, trying to lead the way that was not being led nationally as we know, and in a kind of tragic way, really. The world needs us all to come together critically. And we had a day as part of that at Spirit Rock, and I was on stage in dialogue with a woman named Cristina Figuera, who is a diplomat from Costa Rica, who then moved to Europe and had become the United Nations climate change ambassador, global ambassador. She helped to arrange and put together the Rio Climate Summit, and she was in the process of putting together the Paris Climate Accord. And she got more and more depressed and more unhappy in the struggle with it, and with all the kind of politics behind it, and in some cases the the selfishness and the conflict and all those things. This seemed so important for people to come together, and it was extremely hard for her personally, and the whole matrix of it was difficult. And somebody said, you need to step out of it. There's a place in southern France called Plum Village, which is the Dharma center of Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh, this great Vietnamese Zen master. You should go down to Plum Village. Maybe it will help you. So she went down to Plum Village and met Thich Nhat Hanh. This was before he had his stroke. She said, it changed my life. She said, because in Paris, and this is really related to what you had to say, she said in Paris, the whole model was the victims and the perpetrators. These countries are the perpetrators, and these ones are the victims, and whose fault it is, all this finger pointing and blame and so forth, and nothing was moving. And after I spent some time learning how to sit and walk and quiet my mind and tend my heart, I understood from Thich Nhat Hanh that actually it's just our family. It's just a big family. And it's not victim and perpetrator, it's us. And she said, my whole sense of how I understood it transformed, so that when I went back to Paris after that, instead of using the victim-perpetrator lens, I used the lens of, we're in this as a family, and I got 183 nations to sign up, you know. So this is that shift that's possible from being identified as the victim in some way, which we've all suffered. Anybody not suffered here? Raise your hand. Right. Okay. But it's not the end of the story. That's the reality of it. And it's really the invitation of the practice that we share together. So I thank you all for coming this morning. I'm sorry my beloved couldn't be here except in her ethereal form. She will be here next week. I also thank the staff, Mark and others, Marilyn and so forth, for helping. Thank you for watching. And I want to ask for your support. InsightLA, which has now grown and has all kinds of cool offerings, day-longs and classes and retreats at this big, beautiful new retreat center in Big Bear, and Insight in Action works, which has worked over the years in homeless shelters and with vets and, with women in difficulty and on the border with migrants who are, stuck, and all these kind of great things. It doesn't happen unless the community supports it. And so far, that's really been critical, and as we go ahead, perhaps even more so. So yes, please leave some support before you go. This isn't a tip. It's really saying, hey, I value this and I want to support it in some significant way. And even better, if you possibly can, become a monthly supporter. because then we know in our budget and things, okay, we can go to the homeless shelters, we can go down to the border, we can go, and work with the vets, we can go to Children's Hospital and work with in the ICU and various things like that, because we have your support, and our teachers can continue, so forth. So it matters a lot to us, and it's received with a lot of gratitude, because it's a beautiful thing to do. You get to look at your credit card statement. Okay, I bought that and that. Oh yeah, there's InsightLA. A little smile. It's a very good thing. You won't regret it.
Jack, did you mention the benefit?
What? Oh yeah. Thanks. So on December 14th, there will be our annual benefit. And it's got a fabulous lineup, which includes Father Greg Boyle from Homeboy Industries, who, if you've not heard, is insanely cool and funny and smart and deep and wise. Sean Korn, who's a kind of world-famous yoga teacher. George Mumford, who is the meditation coach to the top athletes in the world. He's a very good friend, but he's also was the meditation coach for the Chicago Bulls and the LA Lakers in their very best years, and with all kinds of other teams. And he's fantastic, and Trudy and myself. It'll be a really cool benefit, and it also is another way of supporting InsightLA. So let people know about it. Would be really good. Anything else I've left out, Mark? He's our director, by the way. He's sitting here, kind of taking notes. Improving things as we go along. Let's just sit for a minute and sit in the goodwill of and the understanding of what people have had to say and of your own best intentions. Thank you again. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday.